everyone. Thank you again for being here. So, D-Day has arrived. We're here to launch the Palestinian Oral History Archive after many years of hard work. The work did not start with the AUB team. It did start many, many years ago. It started with the pioneers of oral history, with the scholars, with those who collected the interviews, with the interviewees' own experiences. So we are here to celebrate and support them. So D-Day is here, and we hope that this success will put a small dent into the huge gap that we all feel sorely. The gap in documentation, the gap in dialogue based on an understanding of lived experiences of the history of Palestine. We have many nationalistic discourses. They are flawed, as we all know, and it is about time to let the people speak for themselves and to bridge the gaps and open the doors so that serious research can be based on the voices and testimonies and on the fragments all scattered. We hope this is a beginning, and we hope you will all participate in the long, long journey that lies ahead of us. So a few words about the context of this project and some of its general planning ideas. But before I plunge into this, I really would like to acknowledge the hard work and the support of the AUB University Libraries. I thank all our funders. I thank AUB's institutional support. I thank IFI, and I thank everyone who collected those interviews. But I'd really like to acknowledge the hard work and the dedication of the AUB Libraries in its entirety. Thank you all. So now, quickly, some context. The project is shaped by a number of concerns. First, the genealogy of the project is guided by two main questions. These questions have shaped our work throughout. What happens to archives post their compilation? How do we provide access to them? What kind of afterlife or new public life can and should grassroots archives have? These are pressing questions in the context of Arab archives in general, but specifically in the context of Palestinian history and scholarship about Palestine, when access to archives remains a huge challenge, and when new understandings of the socio-political and historical realities are a pressing need. There are many aspects to these needs. I won't delve into them, but I hope that the medium of oral history will try, as you will see, through access to these resources, try to address some of the main challenges in terms of opening up the microhistory, the subjective experience, to allow for a new, realistic, accurate, and humane understanding, specifically of the experience of 1948. As the focus of many of these interviews. Second, there is a general concern and a desire throughout this project for opening up the politics of representation. Who speaks for whom? For getting underrepresented voices and perspectives better heard, accessed and integrated into scholarly dialogues at every general level. This is again particularly pressing for Palestinian history, when the need to have a seat at the table for scholars and community members alike takes on an urgency that is truly pressing. So we tried to take on some of these challenges as we tackled the project heads on, trying to build a community of learners, bringing together members of the community, oral historians, librarians, scholars, to build a grassroots and situated archive. The medium at hand, oral histories, collected, as we heard, by members of the community, lent itself to this communal, grassroots, and situated approach. So we tried throughout to be as inclusive, as thoughtful as we could, with the hope to open up the politics of representation and knowledge production. However, as committed as we may be, and we all are, to these goals, there are specific challenges related to the nature, content, format, and genealogy of grassroots archives that need to be taken into consideration as we develop a sustainable model of access and long-term preservation for a grassroots archive. Let's consider the following two quotes. The first one is by the well-known oral historian, the founder of oral history, some say Paul Thompson, and it is a well-known quote that spells out the value and promise of oral history for empowering subaltern groups and for bridging micro-social histories with the macro narratives. Thompson writes, "Oral history is a history built around people. It thrusts life into history itself and it widens its scope. It allows heroes, not just from the leaders, but from the unknown majority of the people. It encourages teachers and students to become fellow workers. It brings history into and out of the community. It helps the less privileged, and especially the old, towards dignity and self-confidence." Now let's take that in. That's all beautiful. But when you start working with archives and oral history, there are other challenging aspects to this. And let's consider the following quote from a poet, from Adrienne Rich. Her poem is Cartography of Silence. Rich writes, "The technology of silence, the rituals, the etiquette, the blurring of terms, silence, not absence of words or music or even raw sounds. Silence can be a plan, rigorously executed, the blueprint to a life. It is a presence. It has a history, a form. Do not confuse it with any kind of absence." The main idea expressed here is that silence, far from being a gap or an absence, can sometimes be a form of resistance, a resistance that has a structure and that can be misunderstood as absence. This is an important consideration to reckon with. In fact, it spells out in a typical poetic form the concerns that have animated the Palestinian oral history archive throughout the various phases of its development and implementation. I think that what Rich is pointing towards is the need for us, scholars and librarians, to be mindful of the integrity of the medium, to respect the voice and the narrative, and to be mindful of the format, the structure, the silences, the embodiment of oral history, and to try to pay it attention as we move along with our attempts to make these archives better known and better tapped into. So we tried to address some of these questions, and I will try in what follows, since Hannah is telling me we're running out of time, to focus on a couple of major questions that have animated the conception of this project. But first, a little bit of background. So how did this project come to us? How did we hear about it? We heard about the provenance of the collections from Diana, Mahmoud, and Mu'taz, and we always looked up to their genuine efforts to capture and document voices, perspectives, and experiences. And we felt that we need to keep an eye on these collections. Then in 2011, I remember even talking to Diana back when I was still in the States about the need to build something similar to Poha. Then in 2011, the project came to AUB when Al-Jannah and the Nakba Archive approached IFI and proposed a partnership for archiving, preserving, and making their respective collections accessible. The partnership with IFI brought in another partnership within AUB with the AUB libraries, and here I would like to thank Rami Khouri, who was initiating this, and also thank the AUB libraries for their foresight and their commitment to this project to take it on. So this phase, this initial phase, was funded by the Heinrich Böll Foundation, the Welfare Association, and the Delmas Foundation. Once this allowed us to digitize the major part of the collection. And then once the interviews were digitized, it became clear that there was much more that needed to be done. So in connection with the partners, we started thinking about how could we provide access in a way that could support new research. So between 2000, I would say 11, 12, and 2014, until we wrote the application to the National Endowment for the Humanities and heard about it, we submitted the application to 2015, then heard about it to start in 2016, 2019. A lot of the thinking had already happened. I just want to tell you, just to clarify, what is it that we're providing access to and what did we work with? There are 4 collections that came to us. These are the Uprooting sub-series, and it constitutes the majority of the collection and comprises the entirety of the Nakba archive series. These are 558 hours of video recordings and a part of Al-Jana series, which comprises 136 hours of audio recordings. These 2 collections, we call them one collection, the Uprooting sub-series, focuses on the experience of mass displacement, forced displacement of the Palestinian refugees during the uprooting of 1948, as well as on life under the British Mandate, the 1948 war, and the experience of exile and being a refugee in Lebanon. Then there is the collection of folk tales, 172 hours of audio interviews that focuses on folk life, folk tales, storytelling, traditional songs, proverbs, and poems. Then there is the Ain al-Hilwat collection, 36 hours of video recording. These are biographies of women from Ain al-Hilwi refugee camp. And finally, the biographies series that includes 160 hours of audio recording. The project's main challenge was coming up with tools and terminologies that allows the material to be accessible to a wide range of audience, while at the same time encouraging and supporting a scholarly perspective that respects the autonomy and the voice, the particular pitch and texture of the interviewee and the interlocutor. The interviewee as an interlocutor. Yeah. Here I'd like to pause. And can I get some drums? Okay. So let's stop a little bit. So this is what it looks like. To everyone who worked on it. And then we go to a live link. Can you? Okay, we'll open it later. But very quickly, I just want to talk about the challenges. How did we get from the interviews? Can we link to this? Does it open? Yeah? Okay. Okay. How did we get from the interviews collected by Mahmoud, Diana, Mu'taz, and Hisham, where people were sitting around, to something as organized and neat, while at the same time trying to be faithful to the voice, to the texture? It is 3 years of hard work by a team of around 20 people, really. So, before we will have a demonstration later on, before we talk about the specifics of the database, what were some of the challenges? Can you bear with me? I think I ran out of time. But can you give me a few more minutes? Is that okay? Okay, thank you. Okay, so what were some of the challenges? Basically there were conceptual challenges and technical responses to those challenges. Some of our, given our core aims of preserving the integrity and specificity of the material at hand and doing justice to its orality, we knew we needed to be creative. We knew that, we needed to address specifically the following questions. What tools and terminology can be used to organize the material while ensuring the least possible level of intervention and mediation? Is archiving not an intervention and an act of translation itself? What added interventions and framing does an academic setting make to a grassroots archive of popular history? How can we minimize the act of translation? These questions presented to us on two major fronts. First, the textual and the audiovisual. The team was immediately faced with the challenge of rendering the interviews searchable and accessible while not compromising the orality and immediacy of the testimony. Transcription, as you all know, allows for easy and quick browsing, keyword searching, and exact and efficient retrieval. A full transcript allows researchers to quickly identify and retrieve information. Users would not need to listen to hours of recording without knowing whether or not the interview will contain the information they are seeking. It's a completely different experience. It is a power experience of a researcher looking at a subject of study. However, the searchability and ease of access came at the expense of accessing the audiovisual medium and the embodied narrative it involves, thus flattening layered sets of meaning the interviews contain. Transcripts position the researcher as a reader rather than as an interlocutor sitting face to face to a narrator. The reader's stance compromises one of the key assets of oral history, namely its ability to give narration a voice and a platform to speak for themselves. So the main questions we faced were how to respect the medium at hand, but at the same time allow for easy retrieval. So one major decision we took in spite, I have to admit, in spite of some advice by some board members to the contrary, is not to transcribe and to go with the synchronizer, an open software developed at the University Libraries Kentucky to basically index at the level of the audio segment. And this was a big cost. I mean, this meant that instead of just indexing a text, you would have to sit and listen, sometimes repeatedly, to an interview and synchronize a whole group of people to be on the same page and create a kind of a uniform tool that allows for this minimal intervention. So now the interview can be accessed at two levels. The first is at the general interview level through searching and browsing the interview's descriptive metadata. And it can also be accessed at the segment level through a keyword search of the descriptive text through tags using words said by the interviewee. So we adopted this kind of hybrid approach where at the general level of the interview, we basically have controlled descriptive vocabulary that allows for integration in other scholarly, academic, library settings, but at the same time, we preserve the voice by tagging at the segment level through the words used by the interviewee. I will stop here and hand it over to Hannah to talk about the second main challenge.
Thank you. So the second challenge was the issue of language and terminology. Is this good? As we organized material and thought of ways of how to provide access to it. Here, the main methodological challenge was devising, cataloging, and indexing tools that, on the one hand, adhere to international standards, but at the same time remain faithful to the localized terms and concepts used by the narrators, in an attempt to be true to their voices and lived experiences. The very process of indexing and cataloging involves the mediation of a subjective, cognitive process. The descriptive tools we use color and frame the content of the interview, and they subtly guide a researcher and influence her experience in retrieving segments or items of relevance. This is compounded by the fact that organizational tools currently available were developed mostly for written material and for official political histories, rather than for oral material. So in short, we were faced with the following challenge: Should our organization of the material adopt a top-bottom structured approach or a more grassroots situated approach, allowing tagging and the researcher to see materials organized in the words of the interviewee? Or should we organize them in our own words as researchers, scholars, and librarians? What we did is strike a balance between the grassroots approach and the more common top-bottom one of organizing, cataloging, and indexing. With a keen sensitivity to key conceptual issues peculiar to the history, subject, and medium at hand, the project team decided to add to existing tools in 3 ways. First is to adopt the hybrid cataloging and indexing methodology, which Kaukab described. The second is to build a bilingual thesaurus and develop custom-tailored subject headings and keywords that remain faithful to the language used by the narrators while upholding international standards. And in the upcoming video, we'll hear more about this from Fatma and Basma. And the third is adding free language tags to identify key concepts and moments in any interview in a freer manner and in a way that allows these tags to serve as descriptors of localized knowledge closer to the interviewee's own words and feelings. With a hybrid cataloging and indexing methodology, I will quickly skip over this, but the point is to use subject headings at the interview level that kind of anchor the interview in place, time, and social and political context, whereas the keywords at the segment level are inspired and drawn from the narrator's own language and words. This brings us to the lack of availability of tailored cataloging and indexing tools. Most of the tools at hand we found unfitting to capture certain aspects of the experience of the narrators. So keywords and subject headings render interviews searchable according to conceptual taxonomies developed for and by the academic institutions. There's the Library of Congress authority list and others. However, they do not include crucial terminology that we need to capture our stories. So we saw that to use indexing tools without amendment or addition is to superimpose a system of knowledge that is alien to the narratives at hand. And it would make their experiences only readable and accessible through academic taxonomies. So in response, the team developed a custom-tailored list of keywords and subject headings that are based on international standards, but adapted to reflect the material. And this was done through a very, very, very laborious process of extracting from the interviews lists of recurrent terms that could describe them. We started with thousands and thousands of terms and kept on weeding unnecessary terms out over the years until we came to a final list of keywords that we felt was sufficient but not too broad. So the indexing team, with the support of the executive committee, extracted the interviews from the interviews those terms and juxtaposed them with terms used in established tools and decided on a case-by-case basis which term to use. Some examples of subject headings we used were expulsion, Palestine, history, 20th century, or Ain al-Zaytun, Palestine, massacre of 1948, or Nakba itself. All of these are terms that do not exist in tools. So this was obviously not a straightforward process, and some of the most heated debates we had as a team was over which term to use. Expulsion or refuge, Zionist invasion, Zionist settlement, and the narrators of course use many different words to describe one thing. It's sometimes the English mandate, it's sometimes the English occupation, sometimes the British whatever, and one of the trickiest one was balad. That is used to refer to both country and village, and so over the years we had many heated debates over which we felt was faithful to the narratives, but also compliant with the standards. And for that, we often brought in a lot of people in this room to debate and decide on which to use. But building a bilingual archive meant that while the interviews are in Arabic, the the lists ought to be bilingual, and the perils of translation were very apparent to us. And of course, there's many levels of mediation and translation, starting from the camera or the voice recorder, the questionnaire, the archiving process, the shift from colloquial Arabic to Fusha and then to English. So we decided that the cataloging and indexing tools are to be conceptualized in Arabic, but developed in both Arabic and English, and this is an ongoing process which has not fully been completed. And we will see in the demonstration that the English metadata has been uploaded, but not all of the Arabic metadata has been uploaded yet, but it is there and it's going to be rolled out over the next couple of weeks. So the end result was 2 bilingual master lists, each containing sublists, one of a subject heading list of about 200 terms and a keywords list of over 1,500 or 1,700 words. And I think the numbers have risen and they are in flux. And the last cornerstone of this methodology is the difference between the pre-controlled list and the retroactively extracted lists. So the lists I mentioned are uploaded to the system and our indexers start typing, and they have to choose from a drop-down list. But as the work went forward, we noticed that there were there was many facets of local knowledge that was not recorded in these lists, and that are mostly names of influential people, revolutionaries, teachers, doctors, certain battles or massacres that are not otherwise available, and that are only specific to this one village, person, or interview. So what we did is add a third list that extracts from these interviews landmarks, places, significant people, and others. And these are recorded in their own section at the segment level, as we will see. And this is one of the project's main contribution to both knowledge production on Palestine, but also tools for librarianship, that is adding a layer of nuance and of existence that is otherwise unrecorded. So it's hoped that the combination of these tools will be some of the project's most significant contribution.
On that note, I just want to add that activating this archive has already started and is part and parcel of the vision and the aim. And we have already been fortunate to host 2 fellows who developed material based on the archive. You will hear from them in a later session. These are Maria Abu Nasr, who developed an education tool on the segment. She'll talk more about it. And Ahmad Barclay, who developed an amazing digital tool that you will also hear about. It won't be a spoiler, but I just want to say that the vision and conception of the project is not of a dead archive that is easily accessible. It is a dynamic archive, and the work has already started.
And now we're in Ahmed.
So we will have.
We will have the video now.
We will have a short video. I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there are many people who worked on this project, specifically at the libraries, who didn't have a chance to express their experience and the challenges they toiled with throughout the past 3 years. So this will be a short video just interviewing some of them. Not all of them, unfortunately, were available, but some of them will speak about like work behind the scenes. What did it feel like? How did they grapple with all these challenges on a daily basis for the past 3 years? So I hope you enjoy, and then we will have a project demonstration. Thank you.
الإنسان يتعلق بالمكان، مش بالسهولة الانسلاخ عنه.
Well, it actually started 4 years ago. Some Faris Institute approached us asking whether we are interested in collaborating with them on this project. And given the uniqueness of the material that they had access to or they were given by Nakba Archive and Jannah, it was really a no-brainer.
طلبوا منا انه نعمل ديجيتايزيشن، يعني كونفرجن، تحويل الاوديو والفيديو حسب الاوديو كاسيت والفيديو كاسيت تبع زمان اللي ما عاد في اجهزه حاليا لحتى يطلعوا المعلومات منهم. هالعمليه بتحتاج بعد التخزين الى عمليه اعداد الميتاداتا، يعني اعداد المعلومات الببليوغرافيه او المعلومات حول هالمقابلات.
Poha is an archival collection that includes 1,000 hours of testimonies of first generation of Palestinian refugees in refugee camps in Lebanon and other communities.
My exact work was to work on the indexing of the interviews, and I also as well involved in the overall planning and execution of the project.
We had to develop basically the tool that we used, which is the thesaurus, the tool we used in indexing. We developed it by using keywords and invalidating these keywords to make research easier.
That's why building the thesaurus was very challenging and very rewarding, because now we do have a controlled vocabulary and a thesaurus on Nakba history.
As a team, we had to develop a list of around 200 subject headings in collaboration with the executive committee of the project.
The quality control process examines the cataloged and indexed materials for any possible errors and mistakes before being transferred to the public use. Re-listening again to the interview is also an important key and step, since sometimes a new concept has to be added or changed.
We also had to customize certain keywords to preserve the orality of the interviews by adding keywords that reflect on the Palestinian folklore, like henna, like mijana, like hijab. We also interacted with the interviews because we had to listen to the massacres, to the expulsion.
Sometimes we cried with them, sometimes we laughed, sometimes we learned how to sing folk songs.
There was no other experience to use, like in terms of systems, to host the interviews and to make them indexed electronically and to make them retrievable and searchable.
نتوقع بالمستقبل انه ممكن يضاف هذا المشروع تسجيلات لارشيفات اخرى من الدول اخرى من الجوار اللي لجأ الى الفلسطينيين.
We are really very proud to have adopted this project and are fully supporting it from the very beginning.
هذا المشروع بوثق للاجئين الفلسطينيين على الأقل الموجودين بلبنان حالياً، بوثق معاناتهم ويكون برهان لاستعادة حقوقهم المسلوبة.
وهي ماشي حكاية بس عيلة ولا حكاية فرد، عندي حكاية شعب كله.